Hey, Keith.
Hey, Jonathan.
So what do you got for me today?
Man, I've been working with these Sankey templates and these radial bar chart templates, and I finally have the opportunity to do some drawing with data at my real job instead of just building bar charts. And so I wanted to talk about the difference between duplicating data with like a self-join or a union versus doing it with relationships. So pretty often we kind of want to duplicate the data or add some other sort of densification technique so that we can fill in all the curvy lines in a Sankey, for example. And a lot of the templates out there kind of do this sort of self-join or self-union thing. And now that we've got relationships, we can just build a one-to-one relationship with like a 2-record data source and accomplish much of the same thing. But I also ran into some tricky stuff with that too. So I just wanted to kind of show you what's going on. So I'll share my screen. This is what we're talking about today. Actually, before we get to Tableau, let me show you like some of the templates that I'm talking about. Alexander Mao is a member of our team, and I love it when I go to Google and I find Alex's templates. And I'm like, oh, good, I get to use one of his things. And he's got this Sankey template out here. And actually, I've seen other people at our customer site just recently showing this. And I was like, oh, but they're doing the self-union thing, right? And so a lot of Alex's templates kind of do this technique. There's the Sankey, and then there's this radial bar chart, which is what I'm up to. This is the template that I'm using. And so, basically he's like, the video shows a new way to prepare the data using a self-union, right? And to kind of show you what we're building, this is what I'm building with his radial bar charts. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this at TC this year, where I'll give a presentation about the Tableau blueprint. But basically, a part of the blueprint implementation that I'm doing is kind of a close your rings exercise where everybody gets their training, and we map a curriculum to each person, and then we do this concerted effort to have everybody close their rings. So I was like, okay, sweet. I get to draw with some course completion data. And so this is kind of what it looks like. And the original level of detail of our data source was like this. We've got a person, a category, a level, and their attendance, and the percent of their completion for that thing. And this data is prepared by our trainer with a workflow in Tableau Prep. So she puts this up onto our server in a published data source, and I get to just connect to it. And after I've duplicated the data for the curvy bar charts, now I have this extra dimension in here called path. Mm-hmm. And at this juncture, I'm just going to kind of walk you through my process and what I've encountered without getting too deep into the details about how to do the curvy lines and stuff like that, right? So this is kind of my process and my experience. Is I made this path dimension, and I did that with a one-to-one relationship with a 2-record data source. So I've just got this 2records.csv that has a dimension in it called copy, and I've got record 1 and record 2. And then I went about this process of lifting and shifting Alexander's approach, which uses the self-union, onto this approach, which has the one-to-one relationship to the 2 records, where I just come and on each side just make a join calculation with the number 1 in it. And so this is my experience, and I'm kind of working through it, and I've got this sort of example student who's kind of taken a bunch of stuff, and that person's useful to work with. And then I worked out the path sort of thing. And so we could see, like with this example student, that for e-learning, they've completed 16 and 48%. And so I built this this rings out, and I've got my numbers are accurate, right? And so next, I want to start to put this thing into production. And this is where I begin to encounter some difficulties with the relationships approach. The first difficulty with the relationship approach is that I can't do a federated join when one of the data sources is a published data source. So our trainer, she puts the published data source out there for me to consume, but it doesn't have this one-to-one relationship in it. And so if I want to build that myself, I can't build a relationship to a published data source.
Well, wouldn't that be, that's true for relationships, but that's also true if you want to do a union, because we can't change that published data source.
Right. But if it was a union, I could have her bake the union into her Tableau prep workflow. And this is the second problem with relationships, is I can't produce a data source that uses relationships from Tableau prep.
Yes.
Right. So basically, if we could, the next thing I wanted to talk about before we jump over to some pros and cons is why would I want to do this relationships thing in the beginning? What's wrong with the self-union approach? We've talked a lot in the past about how the self-union, it duplicates the measures, and the benefit of the relationships is you have these smart aggregations, right? So I actually have two different data sources here. The data source that we've been looking at is this kind of in-person course completion data source. And for that one, these struggles that I'm encountering with the Tableau prep and the published data source on the server, maybe I could just self-union and be good, because a self-union on 12,000 records is not such a big deal. But actually now we're kind of shifting our focus, and we're moving to this other data source that has in it badge completions and skill badge completions. And that guy has almost 9 million records in it. So I don't necessarily want to do a self-union on 9 million records, because that's like this really wasteful and performance inhibiting thing, right? So here's where I just like to kind of talk through what I'm encountering as sort of the pros and the cons of these two approaches as I'm experiencing them so far. Benefits, drawbacks, and thoughts. So for the self-union and the self-join, one benefit is there's lots of templates available, right? I could just go out to the internet, watch Alexander's 3-minute video, download his Sankey template, replace data source, and voila, I have a Sankey diagram, which is pretty awesome. Another benefit that Alexander has pointed out to us is that there's no extra data needed. I don't have to go create a 2-record data source. I can just work with my data as it is, which on my 12,000 record data source maybe is a benefit.
I'm doing a little wiggle, because I'd argue with that the union is creating extra data, because we have this data source which we have adjusted in order so we can draw things in Tableau. And so we've added more rows to that data, which are the same as the rows we have, but it's still more.
But there's still more rows, right?
More rows. And that means every time we're building a view, we have to think about, do I want to work with the double data, or do I want to work with my original data? So the no extra data, I might change it to be no separate data source required.
Right. No separate data files or source.
Yep. Required. And then another thing I'd mention on the drawbacks, or Tableau doesn't support union for all data sources.
Right. Good points.
Yep.
And so really what we're seeing here is that this duplicating the measures is kind of the same thing as what you were saying, is because now if she were to say bake the union into the published data source, now everybody else at the company would need to know that there's a table 1, table 2, and they need to filter for just table 1, and that's a whole extra world of complication that is inaccurate for most people unless they're familiar with how that data source has been built. And this leads to really the benefits of the one-to-one relationship, where It's this flexible data source, and I can use just the original logical table as it is for all of the other views that aren't my fancy curvy thing. And then when I want to, I can do my path, duplication, curvy line stuff, and the one data source with the relationship supports both. And even when I've done that path curvy line thing, the smart aggregations mean that the measures that come from the original data aggregate to the correct level of detail, and I don't have to manually reverse the duplication.
Mm-hmm.
So those are all benefits, but now these difficulties that I'm encountering is that it's not so easy when my original data is a published data source on the server, or when I want to produce that data source with the relationship baked in it using Tableau Prep.
Yeah, those are definitely issues. We use Alteryx and as a data prep tool, and it doesn't support relationships, data sources with relationships out of the box either. So we've had to do our own customization and build our own macros to get that functionality that we want.
Right. So like the workaround is to like, maybe I think what you guys are doing is using the Hyper API to bake in the relationships as an output from Alteryx.
Yep. We're using the Hyper API and the Tableau Server REST API for publishing. Yep.
Yeah. So we can work around that, but it's kind of like you have to have some extra skills. And that's what I'm going to do too. Basically, I've got somebody who's going to help me to download her original data source, bake in the relationship, and republish it for me through some automation. But that's just like a lot of extra effort that we have to go through right now because the one-to-one relationships aren't supported by the data engine or Tableau Prep yet. We're on kind of version 2020.2-ish. So maybe in the future that won't be true any longer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's still the case through at least 2021.3.
Yeah. But we would hope. I mean, I've been waiting for a long time for the federated joins on the published data source, and it's a little bit slow to come.
For it to be able to, from within Tableau Prep,
mm-hmm. or just like to be able to federate join between two published data sources using.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I know it's something Tableau's thinking about because it's one of the most requested features.
Yeah.
I guess I'd add one more thing is, and thinking about this is in terms of performance, like I could see where the self-join or union could potentially be faster. And this goes to another one of our recordings on if we're using an extract, for example, and Tableau has been able to fully bake in that union and pre-process everything within the extract and the union, that may be faster than the one-to-one relationship.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, the one-to-one relationship is taking advantage of those smart aggregations and may end up being faster than the union because it's ultimately having to process less records.
Yeah, and this is where your mileage may vary. It's going to depend. Also has to do, am I working with a thing that started out with 9 million records, or am I working with a thing that started out with 12,000 records? Right, a lot of variables there. But thanks for pointing out that by baking some of this stuff into the extract, it may perform faster. So I guess net is there's a lot of nuance to relationships and the topology that you're working in. And this is just kind of a thing that I wanted to highlight. I personally am going to begin to champion the one-to-one relationship approach when I encounter it, because I've begun to see others at my company kind of coming and saying, hey, we found this template, we're building these Sankeys. And I'm going to want to show them that the self-union creates all this duplication that we could get around and work with probably in smarter ways by the one-to-one relationship. So all things considered, I am still a fan of the one-to-one relationship more so than the self-union. And yet there are some complications there to be worked through.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks a bunch. We'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye.